Yeah, we're good. All right. Are we good? Are you sure? Can I come look at this camera now? Are we streaming?
How are you doing? Oh my God, you're going horribly.
Hey, Adrian, have fun editing this out. Woo! All right. All right, buddy, go sit with Mom. No, you got to go sit down there. No, okay. Got to go sit. All right, we're going to try to give a threat modeling talk with a 3-year-old on stage, which is like a live demonstration of threat modeling. So this will get exciting. Are we good? We're square? People are nodding? All right. There's a lot of people, man. Like, I'm really loud. Am I really loud? That was probably a little more level than you wanted, right? Are you having a cardiac... Wow, what was that? Someone was like pig calling. That was pretty good. Seriously? Dude, I have a lot of level. This is fun. I'm going to utilize it for the best. Anyway, this is a lot of people to talk about threat modeling. Is that really loud? No? I just feel like all I hear is myself. It's okay? Is that what you're telling me, sir? Okay. I meant something else in my school. So anyway, I felt kind of bad. I got this talk accepted, and then I discovered that you're supposed to like brand all the shit that you do. We have Heartbleed, we have Shell Shock, and things like that. So I went looking last night thinking I should come up with some cool names and graphics. So the first thing I thought of was Fret Down, because that sounds really exciting. And then I realized that was actually Stephen Colbert's graphic that I was lifting, and people might actually recognize that. So then I was like, some threat level. So threat level midnight, there's some graphic I can lift. That was also a thing, which I have actually not seen, but it's the dude from The Office, Steve Carell. Like, has anyone seen Threat Level Midnight? One person, so this speaks highly to its cinematic efficacy. I guess I could have stolen that one and nobody would have known. Like, ooh, fancy graphic. And he got Steve Carell to do it. And then I was like, oh, Threat Vector. It was like, oh, fuck, Tom Clancy did that. But Tom Clancy's pretty cool, and I really like The Hunt for Red October, so the new title of this talk is The Hunt for Red October. So. That was my opening joke. The rest of the talk is all downhill. Hi, Shmoo. Advocate. No, fuck you. This is the guy named Shmoo, by the way. There's actually a person named Shmoo. It's not his God-given name. It was his ex-girlfriend given name. The what? So, we may have a license plate that says Shmoo. Yeah, and Shmoo got all miffed because Heidi drove it, and so I told him I would pay for his tags if he got tags that said Heidi. So Shmoo now drives a car just with spiteful license plates that just say Heidi. So this is the kind of person he is. He will permanently tag his vehicle with my wife's name just as a show of spite. But I do owe him the tag fee, which is I think $125 in Maryland. $125. I owe him $125. It's coming out of my allowance. I'll pay him in Bitcoin. Bring it on. Anyway, I start all my talks with the same basic premise, is that you should not believe anything I'm about to tell you. I am a college dropout. I went to school. Woohoo! Let's hear it for dropping out of school. I went for 4 years. I never declared a major, which is a challenge in most universities. I went into the graduation office and I said, hey, I'd like to graduate. How do I do that? They're like, what does that mean? I'm like, I literally don't know how to graduate. I'm like, what's your major? I'm like, I don't have one. She's like, that's impossible. I'm like, look it up in your little computer. And she looks just like, holy shit, I've never seen anyone. She's like, how long have you been here? I'm like, 4 years. Who's your advisor? I don't have one. Like, I have just been enrolling in classes and going to whatever the hell I felt like. Like some sort of like, Walden-esque exploration of myself and failing mightily. And eventually she was like, you need like 40 credits to graduate, at which point I informed her I was disenrolling and I left school. This is the fine institution of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Any other UAF? Did you graduate? No. Any other UAF? I've asked that question hundreds of times and I've found one graduate from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. That's it. It's really amusing. What? Who's their advisors? Probably, maybe there just were no advisors. That's what they just tell kids, like, don't let them declare. They'll just give us money and eventually leave. And no one will ever, there's no alumni association we have to maintain. It's great. I have no certs. No CISP, no CEH. Woo! You can go to my LinkedIn account and there's nothing. There's not even a picture there. Picture, what? No picture. Oh, you're cheering. Yes. Yeah, let's hear it for pseudo-anonymity. I use my real name, but no picture, as opposed to the opposite, which would provide me more privacy. But it's cool. I'm doing the cypherpunk thing wrong, apparently. Made the cypherpunk joke to a bunch of people who got on the internet after 2000. I give a lot of talks. I don't do a lot of real work anymore. I'm actually the CTO and co-founder of a small-ish cybersecurity and research and engineering company out of Ellicott City, Maryland called Ponce Technologies. So we do basically hard problems for money. I try to put that in our statements of work, and sometimes clients bite on it and pay us. Most times they don't, and I have to provide a little more fidelity than that. But in general, I am an executive weenie. I get to... What's the status here? What are you doing? Okay, this is there. You can just hide. That's a good place. All right. This is better. This is very entertaining. Welcome to DerbyCon. It's all a family affair. I couldn't get rid of this child off the stage if I tried. So we're just gonna let this happen. Eventually he'll poop, and then he'll have to go change. So when he's like 17 and he goes to prom, that's the shit that I'm showing him. Slide 3. What is threat modeling? So who here has done threat modeling? A handful. That's actually a decent number. Who here followed the Microsoft SDL threat modeling process? A reasonable number of people. How many people invented their own shit? Excellent. This talk is going to be a combination of inventing your own shit and Microsoft stuff. I'll just preface that right now and say that lost 2 people right there. They just left the room. They're like, screw it, I'm out. Like, sounds way too complicated. We've been doing a lot of threat modeling for our clients for a number of years, and over the last few years, as security has become more and more important to people, it's become more and more of interest to our clients. So I'm going to tell you what we do. I'm going to encourage you to take this with a grain of salt and do with what you like. But honestly, what's been interesting, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, if you went to the board of directors of a major multinational corporation in 2011 and said, hey, there are external adversaries inside your network right now, eating your lunch, stealing your stuff, and you don't even know that you're there. They're like, you tinfoil hat wearing motherfucker, get out. Like, call security, leave, right? And then, tinfoil beanie. If you're wearing a tinfoil beanie and saying that, you're a special breed of different. Like, you get kicked out on premise. They're like, get out. But in 2014, every board of directors of every Fortune 100 company knows there are external adversaries inside their network eating their lunch right now, and they're really worried about it, and they don't know what to do. In 3 years' time, we've had a cosmic shift in how executives and basically everybody within these companies views security. So this industry, this thing that we kind of, come together and wear black t-shirts and sing Kumbaya and get drunk at, we thought, hey, that's cute, we get paid well, it's fun, it's important, but suddenly there's a lot of visibility, right? A lot of visibility. You go to CNN every day. I mean, if you're a masochist, I guess you go to CNN, but wherever you get your news. And, you see breaches, you see vulnerabilities, you see all manner of security problems in mainstream media every single day. First of all, there are credit card breaches. Period. Right? Your card's in the loose. Get used to it. Have you used it online? Have you used it in a retail store? Have you used it at all? It's been taken. Just accept it. I love these interviews with people. Well, they'll do like, Hey, sir, random dude off the street, what do you think of the Home Depot credit card breach? Oh, man, it's terrible. I'm not going to use credit cards anymore. Oh, fuck's sake. Like, really? That's the response? Like, okay, whatever. You go get your gold, sir. Like, I can appreciate, listen to Glenn Beck, whatever you got to do. Sorry, making right-wing jokes. That's going to get me shot in Louisville. I'm sure the concealed carry laws here are really good. I have a baby. Just remember that. And so things like, I think what we used to do, which was security is important, and I'm just going to go yell about it and be like, ooh, we should fix these things because they're bad on the face of it, doesn't fly anymore, right? We have a lot of attention, and we need a basis in which to justify this is more important than that. This is why you need to care about this vulnerability versus why you need to care about this vulnerability, or why you need to spend money here versus here. And one thing I think threat modeling gives us is the ability to formally describe, here's all the threats against our system in a rank fashion, here's a set of controls that go against it, and the serve as the basis for basically future work that we're going to do. And so threat modeling, which I think for a lot of people has just been kind of like a closet fascination, like we do it sometimes, for a lot of organizations is becoming mainstream, like they really want to do it. So, I'm going to go through kind of our process that we've created over the last few years. And I say we, I mean like people I work with, not necessarily my company, just kind of bludgeoning our way through this. And hopefully, if you have questions or you guys have done it differently, I would love to hear any kind of feedback as we're going through it. So, on the face of it, there's this equation. I pulled this squarely out of my ass, but it's roughly vulnerability times probability times impact equals risk, right? There's other ways you can do this as, different ways to kind of frame this. So this is an interesting way to think about risk. Well, the thing is, you need to know all the vulnerabilities in your system to understand all the risks in your system. Thank you, sir. Oh, I've been Smirnoffed, iced. Isn't this some sort of joke? Like I'm supposed to... Right. I got iced. That's it. I'm going to save those toward the end. It is really warm. This is, under no circumstances, a cold drink. Like, this is... Yeah, anyway. I want to tell a lot of stories, but I should probably get out of my talk. So, the challenge is you are unlikely to know all the vulnerabilities in your system, right? Like, you don't have the time to go run around, whether your system is a web app that you're developing or whether it's something more exotic, it's your entire enterprise or whatever, you're not going to identify all the vulnerabilities. So what can we do? Well, we can look at threat modeling as a way to examine potential actions that result in bad outcomes in your systems, right? It's effectively a surrogate for knowing all the vulnerabilities. Like, I don't know if there's a vulnerability here, but I'm going to pretend that there is. I'm going to think about what types of attacks are possible and how they relate to other potential vulnerabilities in my system. What, do you need something? Because I'm all for you, buddy, whatever you need. Nope. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, if you give him an aw, that would be good. 3, 2, 1. Aw. Secondary things you get out of this is you can rank your threats with respect to likelihood and impact in a structured fashion, so you know, like, these are the biggest threats facing us and these are the lower priority threats. You can also identify the controls used to address it. It's a little dry. Controls start to sound like auditing speak, but it's important to understand. If you have a list of like 50 threats and you have 150 controls, that's what it takes to defend your enterprise. You should probably understand why you're doing some of them and not doing other ones. So this talk has its roots in a variety of places. There's a lot of academic papers out there. This really interesting one is threat modeling, the basis of security requirements. If you care about threat modeling at all, I recommend you reading it. I'm a big fan of controls are security requirements levied upon an organization. So when you capture controls, they should be captured in a way that's consistent with the way you would capture software requirements. Software requirements are testable, they're traceable, they're verifiable, all these things. Anyone go through like a requirements class in college that you dropped out of or may have graduated fancy? They beat into your head like what a good requirement looks like. It's actually pretty cool if you start to treat security controls as requirements. It's something that's actually quite useful, especially when you go to your executive teams and have to justify, like, why do I need $1 million to do whatever the hell it is you're trying to do. There's also the Microsoft SDL threat modeling tool and process, which I do want to talk about for a minute. Microsoft has spent an awful lot of time talking about threat modeling very publicly. They've written books. They have tools that are out there. They have, processes that they're very open about. and very engaging about. For a long time, they had like a Visio plugin that walked you through the creation of the threat model. Now there's like a standalone tool, and that seems to work pretty well. The problem I have with the Microsoft threat modeling process, and the reason I'm giving this talk, is I feel it's very developer-centric, right? It speaks to developers. There's a game. Has anyone played the Escalation of Privilege game? It's a card game, and you can actually like flip down cards and like do the threat modeling thing. And it's actually neat. I mean, it's a good way to elicit security-specific information from people that aren't security professionals, but damn do you get in the weeds on that thing. And if you have to do a large, complex, like not software system, it gets unwieldy in a hurry. You end up with like this giant list of things, and it becomes really intractable. So I don't like it for that reason. And even in software land, I have better things to pay my developers to do than play goddamn card games. No offense. I know they put a lot of time into that and try to make it fun, but I try to come up with something here that's a little more compelling and works without getting as deep as the Microsoft one. If you're at all interested, I would encourage you. What I'm going to touch on today is kind of surface level stuff compared to what's available on Microsoft's website. You can get the book. There's a couple versions of the book that are out there that are good. The tools are useful to play with, and we'll actually talk about them in a minute. So, why threat model? Why did you all show up here to learn about threat modeling? I contend one of the biggest things you get out of threat modeling is context. Okay? This idea that when I find a vulnerability in a system, or I find some weakness that I care about, that I can say, this vulnerability is this important in this grand scheme of things. And if I don't know what the grand scheme of is, I just look like a security prima donna bitching about security stuff, right? How many times have we had that conversation like, you gotta fix this. Why? Well, it's important because it's insecure. Stomp your foot like a 3-year-old, You're like, well, that's not really justification. It doesn't work with him. And it does, now, is he poopy? Oh no. Anyway, so I'm making poop jokes about my 3-year-old again. Woo! Yeah, let's hear it. So it gives us that ability to have context, right? Which is super important, I think, because I've encountered in my life a whole bunch of security professionals who think that their sole job for a company is to do the security things, and that's what the company's mandate is. I used to work at a big, I'll say, domain registration company, without getting into name pointing. And the security staff that I led at times felt like the mission of the company was to pay the security staff to be assholes. Like, they're just going to sit there and bark and say, like, we need to fix this and this, and you can't do this, and I'm going to get in the way of everything. I'm like, no. As a security professional, your job is to facilitate the business to operate in an assured manner as possible, given, like, the actual mission of the business. It's not to stonewall everything, right? They actually had guys who were like, well, we want our people to VPN remotely. That's cool. If you do that, we're going to go to their house and we're going to inspect their network to make sure it's secure. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, under no circumstances are you going to, like, go Nessus scan people's home networks. Like, so many things wrong with that. Like, not the least of which of all the shit you find that's illegal that we'll have to report, like, we'll spend just all year dealing with the FBI, because pirated software, all kinds of other crap they're not supposed to have. Someone locked in the basement. Oops, I found them. Things like that. So, providing that context for both the people that aren't security professionals as well as security professionals to understand, like, here's how important this thing is in the grand scheme of things. So, there's a variety of people I think can benefit from doing threat modeling who aren't developers, right? Pen testing. Let's start with that. In the prima donnas of security land, pen testers rank as number 1. They may even just be the alpha prima donna, right? I am a pen tester. How many pen testers in the room? You can admit to it. It's cool. I just tore you apart. So I expect some kind of like West Side Story street fight later on. We can go get it on. I've met some wicked smart pen testers. I got one guy that works for me. He just attacked the system. We got on site. We couldn't use our images, couldn't use any of our tools, and he just found ODAN commercial product using like Fiddler and Chrome. Like, he rolled around like, woo! I have domain administration rights! And he thought he was the coolest guy in the world. Like, that's awesome, but easy there, cowboy. Let's keep this in context. So, I think it's important that when you pre-test, you want to understand what are potential attack vectors in the system. We say that pen testing is a way to represent an attacker's view, right? Oftentimes what I see is it's a way to represent the union of all attackers' view, not an attacker, right? There are sometimes we go in very specific, like I'm going to pretend I am this organization or that organization or have this capability or that capability, but oftentimes attackers just rolling around looking for whatever the hell they get in, and sometimes they'll act like organized crime on the way in the door, and then they'll act like a nation state once they're inside, right? Like, I'll fish the shit out of people, and then I'll get persistence. You know, it's like, well, you know, there's lots of different ways to skin this. Maybe if you just considered acting like attacker rather than all of them, it would be more realistic to brief out to people. So I contend when you're doing pen tests, doing a threat model ahead of time, so understanding where weaknesses might be and what actors may work against those weaknesses will give you more credibility when you have to tell your story after the fact. Secondarily, pen testing, and we all know this, one of the worst parts of it is it's a very discrete, tactical view of a small subset of problems in an enterprise to demonstrate, sometimes theatrically, our ability to get into a system. And it's important, right? Because there are still people to this day who may even have internalized there are bad guys in our network trying to get in, but they don't understand actually how they get in. And the pen test is a way to viscerally show them, like, I used this little box and I plugged it in the wall and then I scanned everything and I owned you and I stole your car. Or whatever cool thing that you did. It's very hard to place that path that you took to whatever crown jewel you were attacking in the broader context. So being able to have a threat model that you say, hey, here's the landscape, even roughly, of what you're facing, and we took this path through it, is important because then they see, like, you had this little fissure that you worked through, there's probably cracks all over this. That's what we need to go contend with. Product assessments and risk assessments. One thing that we do a lot of at our product and risk assessments, when people hand us a thing and say, can you break this? And then we hand back the little pieces later and said, yes, we destroyed it. Would you like to know how? It helps us target the assessment and brief the assessment out at the end in a more cohesive way. When we do product assessments, we look for two primary types of errors in implementation and architecture, which are just inherent in the system. That no matter how good you build it, if your protocol is flawed, we own it anyway. And then errors in implementation, right? Errors in implementation become very interesting because, you know, on the face of it, the system looks secure. Some dude didn't zeroize a buffer or whatever. Next thing you know, we're reading key material out of some system. The problem is implementation can be huge, and we need to know how to target. Right? We need to know where the security-sensitive sections of the system are and where likely candidates for complex components that have probably been implemented incorrectly, where can we focus? So, you know, doing a threat model helps us focus on that. I provided, like, people always ask when you do professional services, like, hey, what does your report look like? Because that's like the frickin' holy grail of, like, professional services is the report writing because nobody likes to do it, and it always seems like it's not quite good enough. So I provided, like, hey, here's the sections in our report for those. How many people here are consultants? Do report writing for you? It's fun, right? You get to the end, you're like, oh, now the words have to happen. Like, it's painful process. Threat modeling for developers. I don't want to beat on this too much. I will say developers are not security experts. Duh. What? Shocker! Like, I know, this is amazing. And not only are they not security developers, but oftentimes, or security experts, oftentimes they don't want to be security experts, right? They don't give a shit. At the end of the day, developers are self-absorbed assholes who are trying to get to delivery as fast as humanly possible. So, you could tweet that shit and put somebody else's name on it. The reason I say that, having been at the other side of the table from a developer and like throwing the phone at him, DevOps is like the ultimate manifestation of the developers flicking off the rest of the enterprise, right? They're like, I don't like IT, so you know what I'm gonna do? Puppet and Chef and all this shit, and it's just gonna, like, you know, virtualize the cloud and things happen. Fuck you, IT, and like, infrastructure's code! Bam! They throw the mic down, you know? If you haven't lived the DevOps stream, I encourage you to go do that just so you can see what that meant. But honestly, like, you know, so I have had this conversation with a number of people who do DevOps security stuffs, about all the potential good that can happen in security, with DevOps. Like, oh, you can, you know, implement all these tests in your code all the time, and they get integrated into your regression server and all this other crap, and you can do all these cool things. And Netflix has like this really, you know, interesting view of security and DevOps, and it's like, hey, I'm gonna, basically look at all these attacks that are ongoing, constantly get as much audit data as I can, watch for these anomalous events, and then in real time, I can basically code against these attacks, deploy them continuously to all my systems, and respond to threats. And like, that's great if you're fucking Netflix, right? Like, it's the same thing about Microsoft. Like, Microsoft has a way of running code that if you're Microsoft, you can write code like that, but most of the world can't do that. Most of the world can't constantly be looking at all the security impacts and things that are happening in their enterprise because they don't have that much money to do it, right? The developers just don't give a shit. So for every one Netflix, there's 99 people out there who are like, fuck IT, and like, they don't care about security. Threat modeling is at least a way for developers to have something to hang their hat on, to say, I kind of know what I need to worry about from a security perspective. Developers want pragmatic stuff. And by pragmatic, they mean, can you do my job for me? Like, that's the ultimate developer manifestation. When we go in and we do security work for developers, they're like, can you just give me some, like, design patterns? This is a real common thing, like security design patterns. I'm like, well, it tends to be really specific to what you're doing. I know, but, maybe could you just write all the security-specific functionality? I'm like, well, you have to do everything securely. It's not like there's security-specific functionality. They're like, well, could you just do that? I'm like, that's your job! Like, you're asking me to actually do your job. It's like, well, you are a consultant. Like, I guess that means I ride in steerage. I'm like, we ride in first class, bucko. Like, that's the way it goes down. Anyway, threat modeling for operators. So this is the same kind of rant. Like, hey, I've been talking about threat modeling and not actually talked about what a threat is for the last 20 minutes. So I'm actually going to get off this slide and actually give you something. So here's what I contend a threat is. Right? This is largely pulled out of my ass. Everyone's always asking, like, when I do threat modeling, what is a threat? It's like, what is a risk? Like, you need to construct an English sentence in words that describes a thing, and it's a relatively abstract concept. How do I do that? And so I've at least tried to templatize a threat into this basically set of variables. Actor does action to asset, resulting in outcome because of motivation. And I'm going to touch on all those in a minute. When you're done threat modeling, you're going to have a list of threats that by and large adhere to that grammar. Okay? I think if you keep this in your head, it'll be useful. It actually shows up because, again, I'm a consultant. I'm going to beat this into your head. It's going to be on the bottom of a bunch of slides so you start to, breathe and live the dream that is actor does asset to action because outcome fuck it, I lost it. So the first thing to start with is actors. There is a relatively small, finite subset of types of malicious actors in the world. In those sets of actors, there are huge collections of them, but they usually fit into a small set of buckets. I like 5 buckets. The 5 buckets I've listed here. Other people will use 6. I can't remember what the 6th is. You can disagree all you like. But in general, there's people that look like nation states with a set of capabilities. There's people that look like organized crime with a different set of capabilities, a different set of motivations. Each of those 5 buckets have a different set of capabilities and motivations that are largely similar, right? Start with those in your threat modeling. Think about the differences. The nice thing is, there's a lot of public art out there about all the capabilities that these people have, right? So, we have hacktivists. What do they have? Loic, things like that, right? Like, we like to DOS shit. Do you like to break things and actually get lower level than that? Sometimes, but those people get arrested. Okay, that's cool. We have organized crime. Lots of examples of that. Every freaking breach that's out there, we get more and more evidence. And then nation state, there's an awful lot of evidence now compared to 2 or 3 years ago, what capability exists there. You can abstractly think about this. What do these capabilities, these organizations have? Then you can get concrete. In your organization, are there specific threat actors that you care about because of past incidents or other things that have happened? For instance, Bob from accounting's kind of sketchy. Like, he's constantly surfing the file shares. We're always catching him late at night in the parking lot, and I can't seem to get his ass fired. So Bob is a threat actor now. Cool. Jupiteristan. I didn't want to call it any particular nation, so I made one up. Herman, what's the guy's name? Ran for president. Herman Cain style. Yeah, it was Becky Stan. That was one of the greatest quotes of all presidential runs ever. And Fat Tony for the Simpsons people in the room. So, anyway, pick your poison, find the threat actors that work for you, document them. The nice thing about a threat actor list is it tends to be relatively static regardless of what project or system you're doing. If your company makes widgets, the same people that want to steal the widgets today are probably the same people that want to steal the widgets next year, right? If your company makes widgets and random people come by and are doing drive-by things and dropping crap on your CMS systems, those same people will be doing it next year. You should patch your CMS system. So you can use this list over and over and over and over again, which is really nice. Now, what's interesting is you have to balance your threat actor list with reality. I will give you an example, a real-life example that I had. So we're a small consulting company. When you're a small consulting company, here, Joe, I'm going to move over here and make your life harder. When you're a small consulting company, people ask you to do things. The answer is generally yes. Whether or not you know how to do it, or the client is likely to pay, you'll be like, yeah, we can do that. Like, I've built lots of electric cars. Like, that seems legit. So we had this small company, ICS, an industrial control system company, ping us and said, hey, we need to get a handle on this security thing. We know there are some concerns and people have gotten hit and we're, this is something we're worried about. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Company's based in the Midwest of the United States. Okay, let's just keep that in mind. I'm having a call, a little elicitation. Oh, what do you do? Well, we build these widgets, mostly 2 and 3 wire things. They plug into this critical infrastructure thing, sell about X million a year. I'm like, that's neat. What are you worried about? Oh, well, we're mostly worried about the NSA coming in and stealing all our stuff. I'm sorry, what was that? And I waited for the laughter like you just had, and there was none. I'm like, are you serious? He's like, oh yeah, no, I've been reading the news, and we're really worried about the NSA coming in and stealing all our stuff. I'm like, you're in the U.S., right? Like, yeah, like, and you're U.S. citizens and make things that support U.S. critical national infrastructure? Yeah. What do you think the NSA is going to do with that information that they stole from you if they were stealing it from you? Like, I don't know, but we're just worried about it. I'm like, okay, like this, your threat actor list needs to be called a little bit. There was literally no secondary threat actor. Like, the reason they called us was because they were worried about it. They're like, holy shit. We did not take them on as a client. That was not a thing that was going to happen. So, the next thing, actions. So, these will vary. This depends on the system, depends on the threat actor. We'll get into kind of the specifics of how to ferret out the actions here in a minute. But in general, they will vary depending on actor, and this is where your creativity will start to come into play as you move forward. Assets. So, assets can be a dirty word in organizations. Like, hey, what computers do you own? That's a fun question to ask. Because most companies there's the data center, and then there's a bunch of laptops, and, well, that's the computers we own. I'm like, it's not technically an answer to the question. It's more of like a geographical where the things you own exist, but not actually like a numerical, like we own N number of laptops. I've had companies say, we own about 500 laptops, then we do an inventory like, we own 2,000 laptops. Like, that's an importantly large difference. Like, how many employees do you have? That's a good question too. I bet you their families think so. God. So, you can go about and like do asset discovery, but that's not really what I'm driving at here. What I'm really driving at is a system representation. So understanding what assets are involved in the system that you're trying to threat model. And even this can be kind of a hard problem because, again, developers, even like system and network engineers, will oftentimes build things, and at the end of it, they're like, I don't know what I built, right? It works. Even my own staff, like we did a little tiny prototype thing for this client, and I asked them, they're having some problem, like, can you show me the network? There were 6 hosts, and 4 of them were all on 3 subnets connected together with like default routes pointing in every direction. And I'm like, what have you built? They're like, we don't really know. Like, it works sometimes. No, like that's not allowed. It's deterministic. It wasn't deterministic. Like, it was totally just like, la 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 packets. Wow. So anyway, it's important that you find a way to represent your system in a consistent fashion. Now I want to show you some examples and then provide a recommendation. System representation comes in many forms. Now I should first preface this by saying I was a network engineer by trade for a number of years. I actually gave a talk at B-Sides Las Vegas years ago about like how to build good network diagrams. I hate bad network diagrams. I will stop meetings, dead stop, and refactor a network diagram before anything else happens. Like, don't mix layers. Like, if you're drawing a layer 3 diagram and there's a photorealistic picture of a switch on it, I'm going to burn the projector to the ground. Like, that is not allowed. There's all kinds of things that you should not do on a network diagram because you're trying to make a reader understand what it is you're doing, not trying to blind them with your idiocy. For example, this is someone's home network. You think you're a geek. Right, whatever geekiness you, like, I have a Samsung S9 or whatever. Like, no. This guy has you out-geeked by several orders of magnitude, including his home automation HAL 2000. I literally, like, trolled the internet finding, like, bad network diagrams and that kind of thing, and this was one of the worst. On the flip side, I think one of the most concise was this one, which works very effectively for you to understand how you get from your laptop to your email server, right? So I was really down with this. I'm like, the coloring's consistent, the font's consistent, like, this is all good. So, I would encourage you, however, not to invent your own system representation mechanism. And the one thing that I think is really useful, wow, I had like a slide transition there. That was unanticipated. Like, that's when you know you stole a slide from somebody else's slide deck, because your transition came right with it. You're like, woo! I didn't rehearse this at all, if that wasn't obvious. So anyway, Microsoft has created this kind of common thing called a DFD, a data flow diagram. So it's actually very useful for having a consistent way to capture your system when you're trying to do threat modeling. And for a couple reasons. One, they are only really capturing the kind of base elements that you need to understand when you're doing threat modeling. Secondarily, you can use their tool to do this, or use Visio, or even, God help you, if you're on a Mac, you can use OmniGraph or whatever, but at least use the same consistent set of very simple, there's no photorealistic servers here, there's no 3D people looking all happy, right? There's some boxes and some lines and some other lines and another circle, right? This is the universe of shit that you need to care about when you're doing threat modeling. Example diagrams, I don't want to walk through them mostly because I'm already running light on time. So, but you got clear trust boundaries, you have data stores, you have data flows. This is what you need to worry about when you're threat modeling. Microsoft, again, has reasonable documentation around this. They have these idea of level 0, 1, 2, and 3 level DFDs, where basically the definition is a level 0 is like the high-level architecture. Level 1 is more detailed. Level 2 is more detailed. And level 3 is even more detailed. That's the definition. So I would encourage you to find a level of detail at which you are comfortable, and which does not result in this combinatorial explosion of shit that you're trying to analyze. Don't really pay attention if you go read Microsoft stuff. Don't pay attention to the levels too much, because you'll just get wrapped up around it. Outcomes. So these are the bad things that you would like not to see happen. So somewhere, like when you're creating your threat, you're going to have like, hey, fraud was committed, or IP was stolen, or my quiche got overcooked, or whatever the hell it was. Like, some bad thing happened as a result of this threat actor, and obviously that outcome will be very specific to your system that you're looking at. Again, Microsoft, and this is where I really diverge from what they do, they have this thing called Stride. Has anyone done threat modeling with Stride before? Did you find it useful? Nah. So, as security professionals, like, we understand bad outcomes, right? Like, we can talk about violation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or whatever A that you feel like choosing. That was kind of a joke, whatever A you feel like choosing. Anyway. Never mind, it's too early in the day for that one. Really, that fell flat. Like, it just dropped right off the stage. Like, yep, that one didn't work at all. Noted. We'll throw that one away. Some days I feel like I'm a stand-up comic, just trying new material, like, off the cuff, and sometimes it works, and sometimes you make a CIA joke and it doesn't go anywhere. Anyway, so they have this thing called Stride, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, DOS, and elevation of privilege. First of all, define repudiation. Define non-repudiation, and don't get confused between the two. Right. You know what? I hang out with a lot of smart people, and 9 times out of 10, they can't keep repudiation, non-repudiation straight in their head. I can't. What's that, Spiky's here? Nothing? Okay. Honestly, I'm not trying to be trite, but like of all the things, the terms to throw at people that you're trying to make clear, threat modeling, repudiation is not the term to use, right? Unless I'm just dense. But what? It has an R. Like it really strikes me as like, well, I have an STIDE. I need an R. Let's just do repudiation and call it good. So what they've done is this very structured, like if you have an external entity, it can suffer from spoofing or repudiation attacks, if you blah, blah, blah. They have this little matrix, including one that's a question mark. Repudiation may or may not have anything to do with the data store. Like in Microsoft's documentation, there's a question mark. I'm like, no. Like, you do not have to be like, meh. Like that's not something that's okay. Anyway, I feel like this gets really contrived very quickly. I encourage you not to use Stride. There, again, is an awful lot of evidence out there, or documentation if you choose to go down that route. I think I found with most security professionals, you could just think, and you go, I know what the bad outcome is. And you don't need to bin them in these buckets, except maybe if you're curious for the sake of reporting. Motivations. There's a lot of people who I've talked to over the years that feel like, hey, I really don't need to care about the motivation. Bad people are going to do bad things. It's like some universal truth. I disagree. Motivations change over time. Threat environments change over time. And because of that, some threats will be, I'd like to give Joe a 10 too. Is that how long I have? Okay, I thought he was being really excited about motivations. It's really something that, as an example, when some hacker group made up of 4chaners decides to like go watch the world burn, they're gonna go do stupid shit. And they're gonna like go do it for like the most bang for the buck, like take down Azure or something, and so when 4chan's all pissed off at the world, I bet that the threats having to do with like script kidding hacktivism are gonna become more important than when like 4chan is off because there's too many celebrity nudes for them to stop watching all the porn. There's my 4chan-ish joke. Sorry for all the 4chaners in the room. I'm sure I'm gonna get doxxed later because of that. So, nobody wants my nudes. I wouldn't be so sure, sir. Anyway, so at the end of the day, you have these assets, actions, and actors, and then bad things that'll happen of the union of the two. And you say, well, can't I just loop through that? Like if I know all the actors, I have like a dictionary of actions, and I know all my assets, couldn't I just loop through it all and like hook it together in some sort of massive combinatorial explosion? And I posit, no, you do not want to do that under any shape or circumstance. You end up with like this idiotic list, overly pedantic, well broken down, completely useless list of threats because you let a computer do your job for you, Mr. Developer. You'll end up with things like nation state does DOS on router. Organized crime does DOS on router. Insider, DOS on router. Hacktivist, DOS on router. Okay, next asset. Nation state performs DOS on web server. Organized crime does DOS on web server. You're like, well, that's fucking useless, right? So actually what I get to here in a second is you can actually distill some of those down to something simpler. So you say, look, all these different actors can do a bad thing to a router that looks like denial of service. Their motivations may be somewhat different, but the outcome's the same. The motivation actually doesn't matter that much to me in this case. So what I'm going to say is network-based denial of service takes out the router and you can't get to our shit. Cool. That's a threat, right? I should probably capture that one as opposed to like 5 discrete ones where I've called out the actors individually because it's not that important. And this gets to one of my core tenets. A threat is as specific as you need it to be. If there is a material difference because of one actor versus another, or one action versus another, one outcome versus another, then they're two different threats. If there's no material difference, lump it all together and make your life easier. This is something that I think that when we do this practically, I've seen people really struggle with. And what I encourage you to do is go to Colorado, get really baked, and do threat modeling because you will learn to just let it flow rather than getting, I do not encourage drug use, except in said states where it is legal and is legal with your employer to do so. So, anyway, don't get wrapped around the axle, find the least common denominator and run with it. So here's a suggestion. You gotta brainstorm. You gotta find some sort of coverage here. So, I normally do is take the DFD, write it down, and then go through and look at, for each element, what type of attacks are possible, where are the trust boundaries, where are the big important things, write down the threats associated with it. Go take a breather, come back, do the same thing for actors, do the same thing for actions. It takes a while. I mean, it definitely takes something. It takes a little bit of practice to get used to. But once you get used to it, you can pretty rapidly drive down through this list of threats. It is really just an exercise. I mean, taking your time, thinking about it, check. Did I think about this threat actor, that threat actor, that threat actor, that threat actor, and working your way through it. Later on, I mentioned, hey, then you should validate this with someone else. Someone else should look at your work because they'd be like, hey, I've been dealing with organized crime lately, and their TTP has been this when dealing with point-of-sale systems. I don't see that showing up here. Oh, cool. I'll include that as a threat. So capturing the threats, be pragmatic. Capture the controls. I'm kind of running right now because I think Joey's going to start throwing things at me in 5 minutes. Capture the controls at the same time, okay? When I say controls, I mean the things that stop the threat, right? If there's a denial of service, I would like to capture what kind of ways I can mitigate that denial of service with, so at the end of the threat model, I can go look and say, oh, I need to go get, frickin' Cloudflare or whatever. Again, treat controls as requirements. Don't get overly prescriptive about it, but there are certain times we can very, easily get to specific controls. Also, you should capture likelihood and impact, because that's what allows you to rank it. A word on that. NIST, 830 risk assessments, and corresponding FIPS 199. So these are documents I'm sure you all have memorized. Anyone read 830 recently? Wow, you're geeks. Like, good work. Like, you're a special breed of government worker. So I think what's really interesting about 830 is it provides descriptions of likelihood and impact that are relatively tangible and people can rally around. Now, NIST lists 3 of each, high, medium, and low. Some people use 4, and some people use 5. You Google risk, likelihood, and impact, you'll find these matrices, and they'll have anywhere between 3 and 5 data points on each axis. I like NIST because honestly, I think if you start debating the difference between a low and a very low or a high and a very high, you have better things to do with your life, like go to Colorado and get baked. So all the people from Colorado are like, it's true. But what's really funny is the likelihood description, sentence or 2, makes a lot of sense. The impact description is like a goddamn paragraph, right? And in reality, it's really only a few words that are different, like catastrophic and severe versus serious versus limited. That's all you need to think of. But for some reason, NIST got super pedantic. It was like, let me list all the super catastrophic things that could happen. I understand super catastrophic as a concept. You shouldn't need to then write a paragraph. So I know NIST likes symmetry and stuff, so I want to write them and be either expand this one or shrink that one. Do not give me these 2 things, because they don't fit on one damn slide. Because this just looks empty and this looks ridiculous. So as a consultant, I get annoyed. But I felt like I should put this here for you because I needed some sort of thing to yell about because I knew you'd be getting tired right around now. I was wondering when the talk was going to end. So, practically, what does this look like when you're done? You've identified your threat actors, your assets, you've developed your data flow diagrams, you've sat around and thought really hard about the ways that they could be attacked. What does it look like? You're going to have a list of things that look like this. Hey, look, actor does action to asset for outcome because of motivation, right? You're going to have a list of, in our experience, anywhere between maybe 8 to 10, all the way up to 50, depending on the size of the system. Along with that, you're going to capture the likelihood, the impact, and then again that matrix of 3 by 3. There's these risk things. Say if it's a high risk or a high impact, medium likelihood, it should be declared a high risk or whatever. So you just say the risk is high because the impact is high, and then a list of controls, right? Here are things you could do to mitigate this threat. I would encourage you to capture this as a spreadsheet, not as PowerPoint slides, because it is ungoddamn wieldy in PowerPoint. You can make yourself, and I've done this, an Access database. I have coded Access databases twice in the last 6 months, and I felt like I was back in college. I was like, first of all, where's the SQL? I can't run SQL queries directly against an Access database. I guess you can, but it's this odd thing that has to happen. It's not. Access is its own psychoses. When the last time, anyone done Access in the last year? I'm sorry. Oh my God, that's a lot of hands. I think there's a talk to give here, right? My son, yes, my 3-year-old son has done Access programming. That's where we're at with Access. So when the model's complete, you have anywhere between 8 and 50 threats. What I would encourage you to do is take it to a coworker, friend, say, hey, I made this. Can you spend an hour looking at it and tell me what I missed or what you think is correct or incorrect or my rankings are wrong or whatever? Collaboration is good because you can get kind of myopic looking at a specific set of threats. You start thinking about like a tree of things and you get kind of wrapped around the axle and people be like, oh, you missed this entire thing on this trust boundary. So having extra eyes on is super important. In summary, the process looks like this. Identify the threat actor. Start with that list of 5 that I gave you. Distill down more specific one, Bob from accounting, whatever you need. Create some sort of system representation. I would encourage you to use Microsoft's DFD's tool or similar construction. You don't have to use the tool, but just take the 5 elements that they have and represent your system in that fashion. If you already have good documentation, use it. But if you already have good documentation as like a left-handed unicorn, right? This is not something most organizations have. And the ones that do, left-handed unicorns are extra rare. That's why I was driving at. It was a shitty analogy, but because I have a lot of unicorns, but the bastards are all right-handed, so, anyway, brainstorm the threats, pivot around assets, then actors, then actions, or whatever way happens to work for you. Brainstorm. Remember when people used to take notes? You know what? Now they're like, I got my camera. I was like, make sure, is there a photo policy here? Is there not? Speaking of my private collection, it's not private, yeah, okay. Brainstorming the controls, at the same time you're brainstorming threats, then rank them, review and validate, and use them, okay? That's the basic process that we follow. We've had a lot of, woo! Yeah, Joey's excited. He's giving me this symbol. Yeah, man. Now what? I honestly didn't think I'd get through all my slides. So, depending on what you're doing the threat modeling for, go off and use it. Pen testers, stop being prima donnas and understand that you're just one little part of the security cog. Assessments, whatever. And ultimately, at the end of it, save the results. Because whether you're doing this for your own enterprise, where you can reuse some of these artifacts later, or you're a dirty consultant like me, where you can reuse some of your old artifacts later and hopefully remove the right parts of the client names. Oops. I've never done that. Left data, metadata in there, so I saw you were working for GM. Like, oh yes, I guess I was, and left it in the metadata. GM's never been a client, that was just an example. Probably. So, anyway, save the results because a lot of it will be reusable later. A word on reuse. Reuse sounds good in this space, but it can be dangerous because if you get in the game of cutting and pasting when you're doing security stuff, when you're trying to get a comprehensive view of things, oftentimes you'll screw up because you'll forget stuff because you're like, look how easy it is. You're cutting and pasting. That's my cutting and pasting voice. La la la, look how easy it is. I would. Anyway, that's all. Other questions about threat modeling? I don't know if you learned anything or not. So, yes, there's a question. Thank God. So the ranking. So, if you can graph likelihood and impact on a 2-dimensional chart, basically. And again, this is where you can pick a model here that works for you. Go to Google and take a look and see what people think. But there's this basic calculus. If the highest rating for one of them, if one's a medium, one's a high, yeah. So you just pick a dimension that you want to rank against, or that you want to build that equation. Stick to it, and then just rank them in order. You can get more complex than that, but for the most part, I found it's not been useful. In the back. Is there a reason? Oh, okay, because to us it's opaque. You look like you're just being a jerk. No, no, no! Go over there just because I need to exert my authority. You look like Cartman, so we can just run with it. Screw you guys. Hey, the question in the back about baking security in. You're bragging! Right. So, how do you overcome that? It becomes extra problematic in like agile land too, where a lot of people are going. And this is where I find you either need to just totally buck up and pay the money to embed developers in the or embed security experts directly into the development teams and not expect the developers to be trained on it, or else you pay a large security staff to be outside of it and basically audit the shit out of things as they're happening. Trying to educate developers with respect to security is futile and not necessarily a great use of your time. I would encourage you just pay security people to live next to the developer and be over shoulder. That's where we've had the most success. I think I gotta go now, so it's been real. Thanks much, folks.